Is this thing on? Okay. My name is Powen Yootipopper. I am inmate number 267784849. I have a very high IQ. I am a Harvard honors graduate, and I have a photographic memory, or I believe it's more of a videographic memory. And yes, I am here to give you guys my story to serve as a purpose of understanding what went wrong, and hopefully things can be learned from the mistakes that I made that landed me in prison. Okay, you want to hear my story? Okay. Well, I grew up in a rural town until I ended up going to Harvard, graduating with honors. When I was a baby, my father was a milk salesman and a cattle farmer, while my mother was a butcher. I first encountered puberty when I was doing my taxes. I'm sorry, what? Oh, sorry, okay. Apparently they don't want me to say my whole life story. Just, the story that landed me at prison. Okay. Well, that cuts a lot of years. Okay, so, alright, well, yeah, I'll tell you guys my story that landed me in prison. I want each and every one of you first, though, to ask yourselves, with your God-given consciences, if you think that I really should be here in prison for everything that I did. Okay, so basically, I was a detective, and I was a detective for murders, and that was my entire life's work that I worked so hard for. And I got lucky with the easiest possible first case ever. So basically, it was a suicide in a newspaper company that happened. And boy, did I thrive off of that. And of course, I'm not going to say the name of which newspaper company or where. And I'm not going to say his or her name, obviously. But basically, he committed suicide. And what was really lucky on my part is I thought about this long and hard. And I realized that since the writer who committed suicide went by an alias, went by another name that was not his name, of course, I decided to call it a murder because it was one name killing the other, even though it was really a suicide. There was two different names here, so I called it a murder, and I told the newspaper company that they need to call this that I solved as a detective, that they need to put my name out there for everybody to see, to get my name out there, to add and build up my reputation, and to call it that I solved the murder here. And of course, unfortunately, they didn't want to buy it. They did not. And they wanted to just rule it as a suicide. And I said, no, no, please rule it as a murder. If it looks like I solved my first murder case within a day, within hours, you realize that would be very nice and would help get my name out there. Okay? And they weren't going with it at all. They did not like this idea. So I threatened to blackmail them. So basically what I said was, you guys are going to call this a murder, and you're going to put out there that Powen Yootipopper, me, solved it. And I said, if they don't, I am going to use all of my money. I am going to make another newspaper company, and I'm going to call it of the same name as your newspaper company, as theirs was, and I am simply going to change the font in the word press to make the letter E shaped a little bit differently. I think it's a Greek letter. It's got like a line through it. And so basically, it would look like the exact same paper as theirs, but I wouldn't get in any legal quarrels or legal troubles because of a loophole where it's not the same name, because of the one weird letter E in the word press in the title of the newspaper. And then what I would do with my fake press is hire a bunch of writers to make fake and phony articles, and then I would simply follow the newspaper delivery crews of the real newspaper and throw away the real papers and then put my own fake papers on their property, and these papers would be so horribly written that it would definitely send a bad reputation for that company, and they would lose a ton of business. So this newspaper ended up complying, and they gave me a story about solving a murder, which was really a suicide, of course. So that helped get my name out there, and it wasn't until too much later that people caught on to my phony fake show. When I got my new job, my boss said my credentials were very impressive, being a Harvard honors graduate, of course, but he absolutely appalled and hated my newspaper story and said I was misleading and I used my alternative view as a red herring. And I told him it was funny and that I understood the metaphor, like murder, like sleeping with the fishes, because herring is a fish and red is the color of blood. I said, I get it. I get the metaphor, calling it a red herring. And then he explained what the definition of the phrase red herring is, and he really started to hate me after just a few sentences. So, yeah, that didn't go too well. He also hated my car as well. He said the squeaking of the door that he heard was so loud it reminded him of the 4th of July. He asked if I ever used WD-40 in my lifetime. I told him, of course I do. I've never missed a year because I do my taxes all the time. And majority of my life I have, especially in the beginning of the year, and he explained what WD-40 was, and then the hatred continued to escalate from there. My boss was not impressed, definitely not. Um, so yes, I was going through the introduction of the offices that I was working at, being a detective in the new place, the new joint, and right before we arrived, he told me that the best detectives he's had need to be persistent. And the problem is, the way he worded it was, he said, make sure you're persistent off and on the job. And I thought he said, make sure my purse is sent. And I thought, well, good thing I don't have a purse. And good grief, I don't know why I would bring one to a crime scene if I did. So, yeah, problems continued, and the hatred definitely continued. It never seemed to go away or lessen in any form. So now it was my first day on the job at my new place, and what was really really nice was that I'll tell you, I was so happy. I was overjoyed. I was euphoric because on the very first day of my job, my new position as a detective still, there was already a murder. That's right. Blood had shed already on the first day. I was happy. I was so happy. I was jumping around. I was clapping. I was whistling tunes. I even ordered a pizza, and I had some balloons and everything, and everybody at the office really started to hate me at that point. I didn't have any friends before, no, but I definitely had a lot of enemies now. People did not like my attitude. I was just happy because I actually had work, and it was my first day in the job. They didn't seem to like to look at it that way, so things were definitely going off on the wrong foot and did not work out very well. Yes, and yeah. I'm sorry, what? Oh, okay. Yes, sorry. The moderator of this program told me I'm a real piece of work, and uh, moderator, I am in prison, so I'm unemployed. Oh, that's what a piece of work means. Okay, apologize. So after my very short-lived celebration of having a murder on the first day of my detective job, and I didn't even get to eat the pizza, by the way. Anyways, we left and went to the crime scene, and this was a murder and a robbery in a sandwich shop, a sandwich deli shop. It was a robbery and a murder. And so, of course, we looked around the crime scene, and we were the only person alive in there, of course, at the time, was the owner of the sandwich shop. And the victim was the worker in the sandwich shop, and they happened to be related, the owner and the worker. The owner and the worker were related, and they were apparently really good, close friends, and of course, family at the same time. Can you have both? Never mind. So, now this was interesting. Um, I wanted to play hardball, so I went right up to the owner, and I said, "What makes you think that I'm not going to suspect you as my prime suspect of this murder?" And he looked at me and he told me that that was a bunch of baloney, and he got really, really mad. He got incensed. And I thought, you know what? That was suspicious. I pulled my boss aside, and I whispered to him. I said, "Do you hear what he just said? He said that it was a bunch of baloney." I said, "Interesting. There is a lot of baloney at the crime scene, and how in the world would he know that?" And you know what happened? My boss got extremely mad at me again. He said, "A bunch of baloney is an expression that means it's a bunch of hogwash, that means it's a bunch of nonsense, it means that it's something that isn't true." And I didn't know that was a saying, so yes, that one also fell flat. The hatred continued to grow. And my boss also reminded me that since it is a sandwich shop, of course there is going to be a lot of baloney inside of a sandwich shop. So I could have figured that out on my own, as my boss put it. And since he was the owner, and since he was in there every day, that of course he would know there would be baloney there anyway. So yes, I definitely got knocked down a few notches in that argument. But don't get me wrong, ladies and gentlemen and other, I absolutely was certain in my mind that the owner of the sandwich shop was the killer. But anyways, continuing here, basically, another thing that put me in that direction was when it was just me and him, the owner, and my boss at the crime scene, alive. My boss looked at me and he said, "This case is very important, Powen Yootipopper. Don't let this killer slip through the cracks." So I thought it absolutely had to be him, the sandwich owner, and that my boss knew somehow because it was slippery outside on the icy sidewalks. And why would my boss tell me that? Because, I mean, he knew it was icy and slippery outside, and the cracks, of course, is where it would happen, and he said, "Don't let this killer slip through the cracks." So I told my boss, "You're reaffirming my original point." And then my boss once again got extremely mad at me, and he yelled at me, and he said that's not what he meant, and he said, "You better not cross that line." So I did not leave the site of the crime because there was a yellow police tape at all of the exits, and the definition of a line, according to Webster, and I was trying to explain this to my boss, and he got extremely mad once again and told me that I wasn't doing a very good job of paying attention to fine details, and I was taking everything wrong and out of context. So basically, we were continuing with the case, and he had found something that was of importance. He looked into the victim's pocket, and what he found was there was a piece of paper with a drawing on it, and it was a drawing of a person, and it was a drawing of a girl, and it was colored in crayons, and there was a phrase on it that said, "A princess." Okay, so it was obviously must have been the victim's child or something. And problem is when my boss told me that, and then he read what it said on the paper, "A princess," I actually misheard him. I thought he said, "Check out what the apron says." It turns out he said, "Check out check this out, a princess. He was reading the paper in the victim's pocket. So I went over to the apron to see what it says, because I had misheard him, and the only thing written on that apron was on the tag, and it said "Made in China." So I bought a plane ticket, and I flew to China. And the second I landed in China, my phone was blowing up with phone calls, and my boss was, I don't know any more words. I've already used the word incensed and angry, I guess you could say extremely pissed off. He was very mad, and he told me to get back ASAP, and that I have a very, very serious hearing problem. And the other problem here is a flight to China and back to the United States is a long flight, and they do say that most cases will go cold and likely unsolved if you do not apprehend the suspects within the first 48 hours. And this case definitely was going cold because I had just taken a flight to China that apparently was not a good idea to do. Once I had made it back into the United States from my flight from China to China from then China after, basically I talked over an idea that I had to my boss using the logic and the skills that I obtained from being a Harvard honors graduate, and I told my boss that I felt like it definitely had to be the bakery, the sandwich shop owner. I said it had to be, in my personal opinion. I said, you gotta listen to this. Pay attention to the psychological profile of killers. And I said, for example, they like to visit the scene of the crime again after the crime was committed, and they also attend their victims' funerals. And I said, those are good reasons, of course, of why this would be our man, our guy, our culprit. And my boss, of course, once again reached an even higher degree of anger, and he said, of course, he is going to visit the scene of the crime again. He owns the shop, and of course he's going to be there because he works there. He's going to obviously return to the bloody scene of the crime, no pun intended, as he put it, because that would be where his friend and relative is, of course, so he'd want to see it anyway. And of course he's going to go back there eventually because that is where he works and he owns the place. And then the funeral part would not be suspicious in any iota because, of course, that was his friend and his relative. So that definitely didn't go over well with my boss. But anyways, I did this. I did this thing where I pretended like he was right, and I would nod my head in an agreeing fashion, and I would stroke my chin with a couple of my fingers. I can't remember which ones, but that's not important. So I took in the owner, and I had to do an interrogation. And I said, all right, you scumbag, you need to tell me this instant your alibi. I need to hear it right now, and in English, even though he only speaks English. I don't know which tense it is, and he said he was sleeping, and I pounded the table, and I said, why? And he said, because it was 2 a.m. And I said, interesting, because only an insane killer could comfortably sleep after killing someone. And he said that didn't make any sense. It was 2 a.m., so of course he'd be sleeping, and why would he be, So basically, he wasn't going over for it, and that his alibi of sleeping was the best thing he came up with. But the interesting thing is, all of a sudden, I had a very, very bad revelation. I told him that I, additionally, had no alibi either. I had no alibi myself. So I made him a deal. I said, if you don't put me under arrest, then I will not put you under arrest. And I let him go, and we pretended like it didn't happen. although my boss did not pretend it didn't happen. He was well aware that it did happen, and more trouble arose on my behalf. So, short story long, this case went cold, and I tried to explain to my boss, who again seriously hated me and regretted having me on his force. I told him that, understand the case would have definitely been cold anyway, because I put all of my case papers and my case files in the freezer because I ran out of shelf space, because it said on the side of the shelf that its capacity was 20, and I already had 20 napkins occupying the space. And then we got in an argument, and he asked me why in the world wouldn't I just put the case files and the case papers on top of the freezer, and I said that that is not a shelf, and I explained that that is a roof, and the saying goes that cases get shelved. And so then he got extremely mad again and told me how much he hates the fact that I take information given to me extremely out of context. And I told him that no, that's not correct. I always use the past tense when I'm explaining things from the past. And he told me he was ashamed that I had such a high-paying, prestigious job, and so basically now I have jeopardized the case once again because I mixed my papers with my food, and the way I was storing them put everything in turmoil, and again I misheard him, and I explained that that was not true, that I always put my food in tinfoil. And he explained that that's not what he said turmoil, and I told him no, my shelf is for the papers. We had a really bad back and forth going on, and it did not go too well. So he continued to hate me just as much as normal. I'm sorry, what? Oh, okay. I was just informed that my moderator said we have to cut to a commercial break.
So tell us your story, Mr. Shark. So it smelled so bad that my family kicked me out of the house.
Son, I hate you. Get out of my house. Now. You know the way to the door. Go.
And my wife left me. And I smell so bad that no deodorant can make me smell good again. I'm also insane.
This new deodorant invented called Sanitation Tenderizing Deodorant makes you smell great for 4 days straight, makes you smarter, keeps you from going insane, and you don't even have to take your shirt off to use it. It looks like you could really use this deodorant.
Oh my gosh, I smell great! I have new long division! Honey, will you remarry me? Great! Sanitation tenderizing deodorant is a limited time offer, so order it. Only available in illegal retail stores across North America. May cause you to talk to inanimate objects. The results may vary.
Okay, so back to what happened here. So then I had to have a talk with my boss again because he was wondering where I had been in the last couple of hours, as unfortunately more time had been wasted, and so he demanded to know what was going on. So I explained to him that as a very good detective, I always take voice recordings as I am taking notes, like mental notes of things that I'm noticing, clues and suspects, alibis, characteristics, and etc. And so I was listening to my own notes on my tape recorder, and then I was making annotations over them, adding additional comments to things that I had said. And I was saying how bread and dough were in the sandwich shop, of course. And I said bread and dough is also slang for money when it's in the streets. The streets like to use bread and dough as slang for money in the street slang. And I thought, interesting, because there was also a robbery from the sandwich shop. It wasn't just a murder, it was a robbery as well. So, what I had said and annotated in my voice recording was that I should acknowledge some dirty laundering. And there was some actually I said there was dirty laundering to acknowledge, and unfortunately I had misheard my own voice over my own voice saying, I thought I said that, very embarrassing, I thought I said that there was some dirty laundry in college, so I ended up taking that note, unfortunately, as literal as anything, and I went back to Harvard looking to see if I had left any dirty laundry there, and when I got back, let's just say, I had an even more angry boss, and I tried to explain why and what happened, and that my mind was in the right place until my mind physically was in Harvard again, looking in dirty laundry. So I was saying bread and dough, and that there could be some dirty money laundering going on, and basically, after my boss heard that, he was, after also giving me an official discussion for my misconduct, and I was trying to explain what happened, just as I'm trying to explain this right now, but likely failing to do so. My boss told me, and I quote, he said, "I don't follow you." And I'll tell you, I was very, very glad that he said that. And I told him, I said, "Oh, thank the heavens, thank God." I said, I absolutely hate being watched. So I started to walk away, and as I was heading to the car, I started thinking about other clues, other objectives that I could get to, before the night was too old. And then my boss ran up to me, stopped me, said, "Excuse me, what are you doing?" And I said, I beg your pardon." And he said, "I told you we were just in the middle of a conversation. Why did you walk away?" And I said, sorry, I thought it was over." And he said, "I told you I don't follow you. I wanted an explanation." And so once again, my ears got the worst of me. Apparently, "I don't follow you" also can mean that I don't understand what you're saying or where you're coming from. So I thought he meant it as in he's not watching me work. So I got excited, and I jumped the gun, jumped it really, really hard, like an Olympic athlete. So, yes, once again, things did not go well. So, anyways, my boss basically was trying to tell me that he already had this whole thing solved. This whole crime was already solved and ready for the booking. So he told me, he handed me a piece of paper, and he said that this was their man, and the paper had a warrant for the guy's arrest, for some guy, of course. I don't know, never heard of him, because he wasn't my only suspect. And he felt that this guy was definitely the primary suspect. So even though I disagreed with my boss on who he thought committed this very heinous crime, I did what my boss wanted me to do. The problem is, the wording that he used was not the kind of wording that I would have wanted to go with. He had said, "Dig up dirt on this guy," I quote. And so unfortunately, I, again with my horribly cursed ears and hearing problem and misinterpreting problem, and I don't know what other problems, excuse me, apparently digestion problems, I did what he said. I was going to dig up dirt. So I went to the cemetery with the shovel, and I had no success finding the warrant that was written for this guy's name. I could not find this guy's name on any tombstone in any of the cemeteries. So, once again, things did not go well. Once my boss properly explained the right thing to do, I tried to do it. So basically, this is what was going on. So I had found him. I caught up to the suspect with the warrant with his arrest. So he didn't want me to interrogate him, okay? But He did ask me out of the blue. His whole face changed. It was I mean, it didn't change, but the way his whole mood completely altered, I should say. And he asked if I was that Harvard's honored detective dude who did the newspaper suicide story. And he laughed and scoffed, and I told him as a matter of opinion that I am. So as I was saying here, excuse me. So money was stolen. Okay, that's the point here. Money was stolen, and a murder was committed at the crime scene of the sandwich shop. So on a hunch, I took this new suspect to lunch, and I took him to a sandwich joint. Not the same one, of course, but to another sandwich shop. And all, as in 100% of my suspicion, was gone. Because I never asked him a single question, not even a single question, about this crime, or about this murder, or about his whereabouts. But his actions told me everything I needed to know about if he was guilty or innocent. He never, I repeat, he never ordered a sandwich. He had no money. Do you understand? The killer liked sandwiches because he knew the crime scene at the sandwich shop very well. And he obviously has money because there was a robbery and it was murder. So, using critical thought, logic, and deductive reasoning, I knew that it could not have been him because of those things. So, yep, he didn't order a sandwich. I mean, who wouldn't have ordered a sandwich in a sandwich shop at lunchtime, and who wouldn't have been able to afford it if you just committed robbery? So, those things told me all I needed to know, and he was free to go. And then, my boss, once again, extremely mad, but at least this time it wasn't a face-to-face matter. But he got on my phone and he told me, "You go back right now and arrest him. There is a warrant for his arrest, in case you forgot." And they got his fingerprints on the crime scene. And my boss also told me there was undercover cops parked on his street watching him for weeks, and they did not want to blow their cover. So they told me that I should arrest him since I was in the vicinity and I was close to him. And he said that basically I need to get the job done for them because I was there, I knew his whereabouts, because I was very close to him. Basically, he got away. He ran too fast. And I wasn't going to explain this until my boss once again wrote me up and said he was very disappointed in me because I let him get away. And I didn't want him to know this, but what happened was he said, "I knew you let him get away because the undercover officers watching the arrest attempt said that you stalled and you waited before you started running after him when he was already running." And I told him that it was simply a misunderstanding because, as I learned, one rule in Harvard is to make sure your suspect is never one step ahead of you. So I waited till he was about 10 steps ahead of me to have it be, a safe margin. And then he ran and I just simply could not catch up to him. So, I followed the law books and unfortunately it got me into some more trouble. So that did not go well. So, alright, now here is when things turned extremely bad and extremely ugly. So, basically, I went for a double whammy. My boss talked to me, and he wanted to know what my game plan was to solve this murder, to solve this case, since, according to him, I hadn't done anything of use. And I told him my plan, it was very simple. I said, I am going to go for a double whammy. I am going to wait for whoever the murderer at large is, whoever it is, I am going to wait for them to kill again, to commit murder again. so that I could catch him, and then I would get twice the credit, because I would solve 2 murders as opposed to 1, and everyone involved would be so much happier to see that 2 victims and 2 victims' families' lives who were ruined for eternity had justice. And I thought, you know what? This would be the perfect plan, and this would give me even more credit. And that basically did it for me. My boss was extremely mad, and he said that what's going to happen to me is I am going to end up where, and he was asking me like where, and I said where, and he said the precinct, and I said the which priest, and I said, don't you mean sank? Because the past tense, I don't think that's the proper way. And he said basically no, precinct, and I said okay, like holy water. Well, how would a priest sink? I don't understand. And then he said no, and he explained what a precinct was, and it was a letter C instead of S. And I said, oh, okay, so that's what you meant, as in you're gonna put me under some sort of arrest. And he, once again yelled at me, and he said my ears are so horrible because it's not only that I don't hear anything, and that every single sentence and thought I have is irrational at best, but basically he wanted to know how did I do so well at all of my previous jobs being this horrible. And I said, first of all, that I had 20/20 hearing. And then he got mad again and interrupted me, and he said, that's not the test for ears, that's the test for eyes. So then that, of course, didn't help my case of me being a Harvard honors graduate detective. And I told him, second of all, that being that I have a photographic, and I believe it's more of a videographic memory, I said that in all of my previous jobs, and me graduating Harvard as an honors graduate student, I said, it was nice because this was a lot of online classes, this was reading emails, this was reading notes, and I was telling him that's where I do my best work. Whereas if I have to listen to stuff, my ears can definitely cause a problem because I can hear things wrong and take them in the completely opposite wrong direction that I didn't want to end up going to, of course. So, yes, I tried to explain that to him. So, basically, he was my first boss to do talking exclusively. Now, there is good news here. The good news is I was told recently that the real killer, which my boss was unfortunately, well, maybe not, well, as long as he was found, I just want to be right, but I was wrong. So the real killer, the one that my boss thought he had the warrant for his arrest, he was the real killer, and he committed suicide, and I was told he jumped off allegedly. So I said, I wonder what ledge it was that he jumped off of, and I wonder why gently, because you think, if you're trying to commit suicide and you're jumping off a ledge, you'd think you'd want to gain some speed and gain some momentum as you're going down to get it over with. And then once again I was yelled at, and I was corrected because I thought that they had said a ledge gently, but they apparently said some word that goes by allegedly. So once again, my ears did not help anything at all in any such matter. So, the funny thing about this is, but at the time, before I ended up here in prison, of course, it's really funny because me and my boss were both getting a team of lawyers, and each for the charge of the same thing, which was conspiracy against each other, which was conspiracy to commit murder. His charge against me for my incriminating comments about allowing another new one to occur, or trying to, and my charge against him for defending the sandwich shop owner, whom I thought committed the murder, and not the other suspect who was formally charged, knowing now that I was wrong. Unfortunately, doesn't hold much merit to my side of it, but nonetheless, less than none. That was the way that went. So you can see who won that court case, as I am here in prison. So yeah, that wasn't the best thing, but I yeah, this is kind of getting sad, but, well, for me, probably not for the rest of the universe of living organisms, but, I can say this. Here's the interesting ending to this, the real apotheosis of this whole thing. Prison, I would say, is probably the best place in the world for a Harvard's honors detective graduate, though, because it's fun for my line of work here. As an inmate, I use some dust, some papers, and a light feather to make fingerprints. And after someone's attacked over in my prison, what we do is we then bet our cigarette or cigarettes on who's the culprit. And, it was funny because I'll solve these things and I will gain my share of cigarettes. And then it was really funny this one time I bet all 10 of my cigarettes, saying that it was me, and my bluff worked because it actually was me and they had bet against me. And then that time, even though I won the cigarettes, I had got more time in solitary confinement because, well, I had admitted to incriminating things. But, it was interesting because I had saved them time from having to investigate the assault, and so that was interesting. You think they'd appreciate that kind of thing, but instead I got put in the solitary hole, you know. And I still solve crimes today. My mattress was stolen though, and I thought who would gain from having two mattresses. So I looked all over for it, and it was stuffed in the trash, and I thought, who would sleep on a dirty mattress? So I stayed up thinking about it. Ironically, I couldn't sleep that night. Okay, actually, it wasn't ironic that I couldn't sleep because I had no mattress to sleep on. But the other bad thing is, then after that, someone flushed all of my cigarettes down the toilet. So yes, this was not good. So basically, I would say, okay, with my addiction, supplements that were flushed away, and my ability to sleep thrown out, I will be unable to do my job of detective work, and if I cannot investigate these crimes that's happening here, then an outside entity is going to be hired to fix the problem, and once that happens, it's going to defraud all of the prison programs. There's going to be staff cuts, there's going to be major problems, and reimbursement equitable to upper echelons of the governments for acting so coquettish with dangerous establishments and being parsimonious with funds. Therefore, the aforementioned cogent points I bestowed using my wit via my subsquibdalian nature, and the steps incongruous with the rudimentary understanding of private practice rules and philosophical prowess, inevitably, inexorably, leading us one step closer to communism and gluten-free oxygen. Thank you for listening.